I want you to keep in mind that for this class, what we are doing is an exercise. So our goal is learning. Our goal is not a beautiful, perfect, finished painting. Our goal is to learn the concepts and principles along the way. Our goal is also not to be perfect from the beginning. What we want to do to learn is be comfortable with making mistakes. And in order to make a mistake, you have to try to start. I'm very familiar with the feeling of fear and anxiety when you go to try something new, or even try something that you've been doing for quite a long time. I still to this day have fear when I come to the easel. I'm always worried that today is going to be the day that I figure out that I can't do it or I don't know what I'm doing. And I often feel like I don't know what I'm doing. So keep that in mind, is that we're here to learn. I, as an artist, am still learning every day, and you should be comfortable with yourself that you're going to make mistakes and things are not always going to be perfect. But our goal is not to be perfect from the beginning. Our goal as painters is really to learn how to fix our mistakes or to make adjustments. Okay, so it's not about being perfect. It's not about being a painting robot. I will, however, tell you that the more practice that you get and the more times you try this process, the more accurate you're going to be from the start. So an accidental side effect of practicing is being able to be more perfect from the beginning. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to slow down. If you're not caught up with our process throughout the whole semester, that's okay. When we do critiques, I will critique you at whatever stage you're in. I don't want you to feel like you have to rush to catch up with what we're talking about in class. Our videos are mostly pre-recorded or already recorded during the class, so you can always go back and watch them. So again, feel free to be comfortable making mistakes and slow down, and we're going to work together to learn these wonderful, great skills. Let's talk about supplies. So when we are painting indirectly or painting in layers, I think it really helps for us to have an understanding of our materials and supplies. The reason for that is when we're working in layers, it really helps for us to understand that we need to make sure that we're adhering to fat over lean. You may have heard this term fat over lean before when it comes to oil painting. But really what I want you to be thinking about is more that we need fast drying things on the bottom or in early stages and slow drying things towards the top. So what we add to our paints in different layers is going to affect the drying time. So the first thing we want to do is understand what is oil paint. It seems like a really fundamental thing and maybe not so obvious to everybody. So our oil paint, when we buy it in the tube, mostly only consists of two things. And that is the paint pigment. In this case, it's burnt umber. Most tubes will have the pigment number on it. So this is PBR6. So this is synthetic iron oxide. So I always like to say, like, this is basically just dirt from the city of Umber that's been burned. So when we have a tube of burnt umber oil paint, the paint particles floating around in here is just kind of dirt that's been burned. Okay, so we have some burnt umber. Now the other item that is in this tube of paint is a binder. When you think of a brick wall, it's kind of like the mortar that's holding all the bricks together, and the brick is actually the paint particles. So usually the binder is an oil of some kind. So this is ground in linseed oil. So this tube of paint, and what oil paint in general is made of, is just paint particles and a binder, which in this case is linseed oil. Sometimes it's safflower oil, sometimes it's walnut oil. There are different properties to the different oils, but in generally, I don't want you to care too much about what is in the oil paint right when you're starting to learn how to paint. Just know that your paint is made of paint particles and oil that's been ground together. So that is what oil paint is. Okay, now let's get into the two different mediums that I had you get for this class. One is linseed oil. Okay, so that's just more of what our paint is actually made with. Okay, so I had you get some linseed oil and I had you get Gamsol. Gamsol is an odorless mineral spirit. It is a solvent. Okay, so these two things do very, very different things to our paints. Okay. Gamsol, or odorless mineral spirits, or a solvent of any kind, is going to break down our oil paint. So it's going to kind of theoretically get rid of a little bit of the oil content of our paint. Solvent also dries by evaporation. That is a very fast process, meaning this is going to make our paint dry a lot faster than if it was just paint by itself. Okay, so Gamsol solvent will make our paint dry faster, but it will also start to break down the binder that's holding all of our dirt together. So if we add too much Gamsol, if it gets too broken down, we're gonna be left with a bunch of dust and a bunch of dirt from umber sitting on our canvas. So we want to be careful to not use too much Gamsol at any time. Again, this dries by evaporation. It will dry very quickly. I find that Gamsol makes paint very hard to control. It makes it a little bit more like watercolor. Linseed oil, however, is adding more of what our paint is actually made of. So linseed oil is much more slow drying than Gamsol because it dries by oxidation. This is a chemical reaction. This chemical reaction can be sped up or slowed down with heat or cold. So if we want our paintings to dry faster, again, this is in our oil paint. If we want our oil paints to dry faster, we can put them near a heat source. Heat will speed up any chemical reaction and therefore make our paintings dry faster. Your paintings will dry faster in the summer, and in the winter they will dry slower. So if we want to slow down our drying time, we can be in a cold space. This actually also brings me to being able to save our paint from session to session, or any paint that we've squirted out from the tube. If you take some palette paper, here we have a pad of palette paper. So normally to save my paint, I will cut this up and I will put all my paint that's left over on palette paper in a Tupperware container and in a freezer. So if my paint is sitting in the freezer overnight, it's going to stay much more fresh and slow down the drying time. So again, to revise and to readdress, our Gamsol is a solvent. It dries fast, and we will use this in likely only the toning stage of our painting, and maybe in the first pass. After that, we don't want to use this because too much of this is not a good thing. Our linseed oil dries slower. The more linseed oil we will add to our paint, the slower it will dry. Okay, so that is oil paint and the two solvents. So normally when I am painting, I usually have two cleaning tanks sitting nearby. Now this is a cleaning tank. This is also a cleaning tank. Now, this one is filled with that solvent. I will only use this cleaning jar when I'm using solvent, again, which is only in my usually first layer. Other than that, this cleaning jar with solvent goes bye-bye. The main jar of cleaning, main cleaning jar that I'm using at all times when I'm painting is my cleaning jar that has linseed oil in it. Now this looks pretty dirty, but that's okay. It can still clean my brushes. I want to make sure that the linseed oil is filled above the coil so that when I need to clean my brushes, it is below the line of the oil. I have a whole nother video about cleaning brushes and you can check that out later. Okay, so I do fill this cleaning jar with linseed oil. I do use that throughout my painting process to reset my brushes or to clean my brushes, and I also use that at the end of the day when I am ready to clean up, right before I use soap and water. Okay, so those are the two liquids. I also have a jar of just clean linseed oil. I know this doesn't look too clean, but I'm just not washing my brushes in this. Okay, so I usually have linseed oil. This is the linseed oil I'm going to possibly add to my paint. So I have that off to the side. Another note about the solvent. It's not good to breathe in solvent. So if you are using the cleaning tank with solvent in it, or you're using a little bit of solvent to add to our paint, we always want to make sure to have the jar or bottle covered. You don't want this sitting out in the studio. There will be times that I have accidentally left the cover off my cleaning tank if I'm using the solvent cleaning tank, and at the end of the day I will have a sore throat, so we don't want to do that. Okay, paper towels. I like the blue shop paper towels. They're not very linty, so there's often times that the other brands can get super linty, and then if I'm, you know, washing my palette or wiping off my brushes, I just want lint everywhere. So that's why I like to use the shop towels. I also like to have a pair of tweezers floating around to get any junk out of my paint. Okay, palettes. I highly recommend New Wave palettes. I absolutely love them. This is a tabletop Posh palette. Believe it or not, this used to be a neutral gray, but I use it so much that it eventually tones to this color. So New Wave palettes are wooden palettes that come pre-finished. You just take the wrapping off and you get to use them. Here is another example of a New Wave palette that somebody left behind, but they're just really fabulous, nice palettes. I don't ever want people using raw wood palettes. So if you get a raw wood palette, you need to make sure you season it, meaning that you're going to seal it with linseed oil or some other, or shellac, so that the wood does not absorb the oil from your paint. So if you're using a raw wood palette, make sure you either finish it, or what I would recommend is get a New Wave. This is a tabletop one. They also have ones that you can hold on to. For these makeup sponges, I recommend getting the makeup sponges. I use these for oiling out. So oiling out is a phenomenon that happens to our paintings, especially if we're working in layers. There's a whole nother video about that, and you can go watch that at some point. But you want to make sure that with our makeup sponges that we get the ones that don't have vitamin E in them. That's pretty important. I don't know what vitamin E is going to do to our paintings. Okay, palette knives. These are the typical, this is my typical palette knife size. This is what works for my hand mechanics in terms of mixing and just general use of the palette knife. I also have one that's a little bit larger and a couple that are a little bit smaller, but I think you need to do what works with your hand mechanics. So you just want it to be comfortable. You want to be able to mix pretty decent size piles of paint. So those are palette knives. Another thing I would recommend, I mean, this is my favorite thing, is a tube wringer. You put the tube of paint in there and you squeeze it and it squishes the paint to the end. It's one of my favorite things. Okay, now let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is brushes. Brushes are a very personal thing. And you really only know what you like over experience in trying out different brands and styles and seeing what you like. So what I've landed on personally over the years is my favorite brush to use for pretty much 80% of my painting are Trekell's Spectrum Brights. So these brushes are fabulous. They're nice and soft. They're great for putting down even application of paint. They hold up really well. I tend to be pretty abusive to my brushes, but these are really solid brushes in my opinion. I usually have a range from 0 to 10. As you can see here, I have a lot of brushes, but these are the ones that I use most often. So I usually stock up on these. These are the Spectrum Brights from Trekell. One of my favorite brushes is the 0. It's actually a very small flat, but I actually find that that works a lot better for me than rounds for small details. I will get a bunch of just junky rounds to use and abuse and then throw away because I don't know, I just tend to abuse them. So I get the cheapo ones. but they also have rounds in the spectrum as well. If you're looking for a slightly less expensive, not that I think these are expensive, I think these are actually quite affordable. The Golden Taklon line from Trekell is very similar to this, but I feel like the spectrum holds their shape a lot longer. I also recommend they have these brushes called Mops. Now, I don't actually paint with these. They're very, 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 very soft. They're really lovely. But I actually use them for softening and blending in the very last layer of my painting. These are shorter brushes. For a similar action, I will use a fan brush. So I don't actually paint with a fan brush. A fan brush is mostly for me to soften texture or to blend in a later layer or just to generally affect the paint. And Trekell has the Golden Taklon version of the fan brush in the set that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So these are softs. So softs are going to put down much more even application of paint. Now we get to Hog Bristles. I am a huge fan of Trekell's Hog Bristles, the long filberts. So the flats I tend to love because they're really great for me for drawing. So I always really paint and draw in a very structural manner. So the flats to me are just very natural. When I'm first blocking in a painting, usually for my first passes, I'm using these Hog Bristles. They're really great for putting down quantities of paint relatively thinly, and they force me to keep a softer edge, so I really do like the Hog Bristles. I think they're just a general great workhorse for my first pass of paint where I'm not getting too specific, and they still allow me to draw really specifically in that first layer. So I have a huge range of sizes. I think the smallest one, this is a 0 size, so that's getting into those little nooks and crannies. Meanwhile, the 7s, 8s, 9s will be great for backgrounds. But in general, I just absolutely love these Hog Bristles from Trekell. So these are natural Hog Bristles. You might want to try flats. The flats obviously are going to be more square, but for my bristles, I tend to prefer the filberts, and for my softs, I prefer the flats. There's also synthetic bristles. To me, I feel like they tend to put down too perfect of an application. If I'm going to use, if I want a perfect smooth application, I'll probably head for more of a soft range, but the synthetic bristles can be good for backgrounds or different things. So Trekell does have Opals, which is a synthetic bristle. Again, I like the Hog Bristles because they put down a much more organic brush stroke. There's evidence of the hairs. It's much more painterly. So this is an uneven application. The brushes are much more aggressive. These are smoother applications and not as aggressive, but they put down a much more even brush stroke. In my first pass, I don't want an even brush stroke right off the bat. These will still tend to give you a little bit more of an even brush stroke. So Trekell's got the Opals. I also really like the Princeton brand for these synthetic flats or even filberts. But again, with brushes, you're really going to want to try out a couple different brands and a couple different hairs to see what you prefer. I'm very thankful that Trekell's actually put together a set for my students, which consists of a bunch of the long filbert Hog Bristles, the Golden Taklon fan, and a few of the Spectrum Bright. So if you're looking to try these out, it's a good kind of sampler of all the different brushes that I discussed here today. Another tool that I like to recommend is this thing called the Kemper Wipeout tool. It's kind of got these rubber tips. One's a little bit of a wedge and one's a little bit more of a point. This is kind of nice for being able to adjust the paint on the canvas when it's already down. So that's recommended. It's not absolutely necessary, but I have used it in the past for different demo paintings. So those are brushes. So I like to try to keep things organized. So I'm going to put these away. If you go on the Trekell website, I think you can look on the brush sets, and there's the Julie Beck set. I wanted to add one more note about brushes. So I talked about the Trekell brand that I like for the Spectrum Brights and the Hog Bristles. But I also wanted to mention that a lot, these brushes eventually will break down and I'll eventually need new ones. So I usually don't throw any of my brushes away because I always find that they can be used later on for some other purpose. So I have a couple other brands that I've used in the past. If you're looking for a much more affordable, more often replaced brand for a substitute for those Trekell Spectrum Brights, the Utrecht Mixed Synthetic line is pretty decent. I used to use these a lot, but they do get ruined pretty quickly. But I have saved a lot of them because what I find is these brushes, when they get splayed, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about when they get splayed or when they just get a little bit more annihilated. I am very aggressive with my brushes, apparently. I don't throw them away because I can use them. So these brushes, I don't paint with them, but they are good for affecting the paint that's already down on the canvas. So I'll use this to actually shape an edge using this clean, dry brush. So I call these actually my Poofy brushes. I know that's not the technical name for them. This brand happens to be Rosemary's Filberts, or their short filberts. But I find that the volume of hairs on there, while it doesn't suit my painting style, actually works really well for just kind of pushing paint around that's already on the canvas if I'm trying to refine an edge. And these splayed brushes will be very similar to that. I also find that the Monarch, this Monarch Filbert's great for that too. Again, I'm kind of pushing paint around that's already on the canvas, or using it to lay down a larger, less specific area. So I would say keep a bunch of older brushes. If you ever just need to push some paint around, use it. You could use old brushes to scrub things, or for making, when you're doing a paint transfer, you're gonna find using, like this bristle brush has been really just worn down over time, but because it's so aggressive, it's kind of perfect for applying the paint to the back of a paint transfer. Another thing that I would recommend for brushes is also having a couple of large, like these are from Blick. This is a bristle brush, but it's still relatively flexible and a really nice soft brush. These are good for toning canvases. You want to have just a variety of brushes on hand, some kind of junky and old, and a bunch of brand new, so that you have all the tools at your disposal. Canvas can be a very personal thing, and it's really going to take a lot of just trying out different kinds to see what you like most. But if you want to just get started, my favorite surface to paint on at the moment are Raphael Premium Archival Oil Primed Linen Panels. So these I get at Jerry's Artorama. Again, they're Raphael Oil Primed Linen Panels. These are on wood, so it's canvas that comes primed and glued to this wood panel. So what I love about this is it's just ready to go right out of the gate. I don't have the time or the space to be justifying my own things, and I really like this surface. So it's oil primed, so you can only use oil paints on it, and it's linen, and it's pretty much portrait grade. It's very smooth. There's only a little bit of texture, but the texture is enough for me. I really enjoy working with a little bit of canvas texture. I don't want something that's super, super slick and smooth like gesso board. So this is, you can also turn this into a less textured canvas by just shifting the way you have it. What I also like about this is they come in standard sizes, I believe up to 30 by 40, but I just, so those are standard sizes. But if you want a custom size, you can cut these down. So I use a handheld circular saw to cut these down, and that makes it very convenient. So this is my main canvas surface that I use. I prefer panels because they are easy to ship, easy to frame, and they tend to be more archival because there's not the flexibility of stretch canvas. So if you are going to stretch a canvas, I do recommend, the canvas I'm used to using is Clayson's double primed or quadruple primed Linen, again, I want to recommend linen for pretty much everything. Linen is a much stronger fiber than cotton. You can physically rip cotton very easily, and linen is a lot stronger. It's just more durable, and it's much less absorbent. So if you're gonna stretch a canvas, I would recommend linen. This is Clayson's double primed, double oil primed. And I do also have another video on my channel about how to use stretcher keys. So I used to buy pre-stretched canvas, and they always come with those little wooden keys, and I would have no idea what they were for, so I would just throw them away. But little did I know, they were for when your canvas gets a little loose and you want to tighten it up. That's what those are for, and I have a video for that on my channel. Okay, so so that's Clayson's double prime. This is Raphael's. What's also nice is there's a lot of options out there today for working on panels. So this is something called aluminum composite or AlumiComp. So Jerry's also sells these. They're from New York Central Art Supply. This is Clayson's, but it's glued down to the AlumiComp. So you can just already get it glued down to the panel. So this is great. Again, really sturdy, really archival, great, easy to frame, easy to ship. So this New York Art Supply actually comes with a bunch of different options glued down to it. So not only does it have Raphael's canvas, it also have Raphael's zinc-free canvas. So that's a big deal these days. This is Clayson's double prime, but they also have just straight up gesso, and they have, I believe, Courbet, which is a brand of canvas. So those are some other options. I also recommend checking out a couple different companies. So Raymar is a company that you can get a bunch of sampler packs from. So I really liked this L64C. That was a nice thing to paint on. So I get these little sampler packs and try them out so you can see how the paint works on the surface and decide for yourself. So also part of that same sampler pack was the L22U, which is Belgian linen, and I think it's a universal primer on it. So that was actually pretty nice too. So these were both parts of the same sampler pack, different canvases. You can see, get a feel for what you like. Artifacts also is a company that offers panels with different surfaces glued down to, I believe it's hardwood or foam core even. And then there's also Raymar. And then if you look at Trekell, who makes my favorite brushes, Trekell also offers options for custom wood-shaped panels that have either gesso, unfinished, or glued down canvas surfaces, but also custom panels and standard panels as well with Clayson's glued down to them and that type of thing. So those are my recommendations for canvas. So again, linen is really the preferred surface. Personally, I don't care if it's acrylic or oil primed. I tend to work on the oil primed, but I hope that helps get you started on canvas. If you're doing a drawing for your class, you're also going to need drawing supplies. Usually that includes a drawing board, drawing paper, sharpened pencils, 2 different types of erasers. I prefer a kneaded eraser and a hard eraser, anything you use to sharpen those pencils, and masking tape. I also recommend getting a plumb line, which can help with drawing. A plumb line is simply a string with a heavy object at the bottom of it. Also, if you're going to be doing a paint transfer, you're going to need tracing paper and masking tape as well. I do have another video on this channel that shows how I do a paint transfer using that tracing paper. Thanks for watching.